Hey everyone, it's Anthony Onesto, and this is New York HR, and I'm really excited. We're a little late today on the live show, but the good thing is most of our viewers watch afterwards. We are missing my mensch this week. Steve Levy is actually at this thing called SourceCon, which is like, I guess, Comic-Con with I don't know. It's a bunch of recruiters talking about stuff. So I'm sure there's a lot of drinks involved. But anyway, I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Joy Sybesma. She is the SVP of People Operations at Kargo. Joy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm excited. You know, as Steve is the recruiting side of this, although I did recruiting in my career, but I'm the HR guy, and so I'm excited when HR folks come. I'm excited when recruiters come on board, but I'm excited to talk HR. I'd love to, you know, talk about what you're doing at Kargo. I know you have a really interesting career. You've been a New Yorker for a little while, but you were back and forth originally from Minnesota, which we'd love to hear about. But like every show, you know, for anyone who's tuning in for the first time, what we love to do is really get in depth about a person and their background. Where were you born? Tell us about your parents. It becomes a little Freudian, but not too deep in that kind of stuff. But I think what happens is if you don't really understand where someone came from, you don't know where they're going, right? So if you understand sort of where you came from, what was that like, it kind of intertwines into what your career is like. So, and then we're going to talk a little bit about innovation. Kargo's doing some interesting things here in New York. As always, very hard to recruit in ad tech or any sort of startup or any technology in New York City. So there's definitely things we want to hear from Joy around that. And then we'll end with you know, our favorite Pizza by the Slice location, which is our staple here at New York HR. So so Joy, I'd love to hear. So Minnesota, tell me a little bit about what you know, growing up in Minnesota, a little different than New York, I think.
A little different, yeah. So I was actually born in Texas, but my parents were from Minnesota and Wisconsin. So moved back to Minnesota when I was 5, and I lived there until freshman year of college. So Minnesota, yeah, a long time. If you know, Minneapolis is where I'm from, suburbs of Minneapolis, and I guess the one thing that's important about that is I always knew I was eventually going to leave Minneapolis. So, great Midwestern roots. Actually, like a lot of Fortune 500 companies, beautiful lifestyle, cold as hell, obviously. But
so cold as hell. So how cold does it get? Like, what's a winter in? I mean, is it like what we see in Green Bay? Yeah, negative.
Like normal negatives. Like I'll never forget, you know, like my dad going out to the car like an hour before church on Sunday to warm it up, just so we wouldn't, like, you know, freeze for the 30-minute ride.
Yeah, it's still cold out.
It's a toughness, you know, and also a coziness, because you know, you really, the whole city and state is built around the weather, and so you know, you are prepared. You're prepared for the elements. It kind of creates a resiliency. There's no like closing school because of snow. Like that doesn't happen. Like the clouds get out there, and you know, you deal with it.
Yeah. Tunnel to high school. Yeah.
But it creates this also like this sense around you know, being indoors, the coziness, being with family. My family is super non-traditional for Minnesota, especially. My parents are divorced. My mom actually lives in Bali, in Indonesia.
Interesting. How'd she wind up in Bali?
So she went there when she was 60 with my sister for a yoga retreat, and felt like she had unfinished business, and booked a ticket, and she's living the life, writing a memoir, and
cool.
a bestseller, because this woman has lived quite the life.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. I wonder if that's a common thread at Bali, right? Like, you know, yoga retreat, stayed, okay.
Totally. Well, it's like the Eat, Pray, Love thing.
Right.
But apparently the Balinese have signs everywhere that you can buy that say Eat, Pray, Leave, because so many women come there looking for like enlightenment and love. So yeah, so my parents are divorced, and this is kind of important, I think, to my background, is that I have a very strong mother, and then I have 2 sisters who, the 3 of us couldn't be more different. My older sister is just one of the smartest, most academic people I've ever met, but she's really found a way to monetize her passion. She does evolutionary astrology. She does trauma-sensitive yoga.
Wow.
Yeah. My
I
younger
don't even know what those words mean, by the way.
Me
That
neither.
sounds really, really academic, though.
academic, but yeah, it's so spiritual. And my
Right.
sister is spent a lot of time in San Francisco in the tech world, and moved back to Minnesota for.
I know what that means. Yeah.
You know what that means. So she's a product manager, and so she's really in the tech world, and so is her husband. So we have this like interesting family dynamic of let's say 4 powerful, interesting, independent women.
Yeah, cool.
But who really, you know, I think figured out a way to follow our passions and find success in them. And they're all 3 very different. So I thought that was important, just a little background.
No, that was great background. That was super. Thanks for getting super personal. That was awesome.
No problem. That's what we do, right? You just got to share. So in terms of how it's kind of led to my career in people ops, so I grew up as an artist. I loved to draw fashion. I was a fashion designer. I dreamed of a New York lifestyle, and it was all very clear to me. I was going to move to New York. I was going to, you know, be at Fashion Week. I was going to have award-winning designs, the whole 9 yards.
So what was it in your head? You know, who were you going? Who was the next? Like, you're going to be the next fill in the blank. Who was that? Like, your way.
Because I was all about the like wedding gowns and, you know, Oscar red carpet dresses.
Of course.
So,
of course. Where else would you be, right? Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think it was, you know, like there's like Sunday school and like the children's sermon in church, and I'm going to come across as really religious. This was my upbringing. Not so much anymore.
Italian Irish kid from New York. You know, church is, you know, oh, we got to go again, yeah.
But it's part of the way of life. But funny enough, it was like this. I was 7 years old in the children's sermon. They asked, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, a fashion designer. So knew from a young age that was a passion. Yeah. So then life happens, right? So I actually left Minnesota when I graduated from high school, and I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York.
FIT, awesome.
FIT. Interesting timing. It was 2001, and so 2 weeks after I arrived was 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So I was like totally naive, you know, youngin' from Minnesota out on my own for the first time.
Yeah, one of the worst, like, hardest cities to live in, and then you add the largest terrorist attack ever. It's like, yikes! Wow.
Totally, and it put things in perspective, right? So as I think it did for a lot of people. But one thing I figured out was, first and foremost, to your point, like New York is a hard city to move to, and if you're not ready for it, it's going to spit you out. But if you're ready for it, it's going to be like, let's go, you know?
Now, so a lot of people say that. I'd love to get your perspective on it. So I was born and raised here, so I know nothing other than New York. What do you mean when you say spit you out? Like, literally, what does that mean? Like, what is the difficulty? Because this is some of the stuff that we want to get through. Because when you're recruiting and you're leading HR, you're dealing with the folks that are either coming to New York or living in New York. So you have to deal with some of this kind of stuff. But, so what do you mean by that? Like, literally, like what's hard about New York, or what did you find hard about New York?
Yeah, I think New York demands just greatness. And it demands grit, and to bring that to life, you know, I think just like the reality of not having a car, okay, like first and foremost, like everything is like a schlep, right? It's like grocery store, dry cleaning, especially when you're poor and you're in New York.
By the way, for those folks that are over the flight, we like to do this. We call out the New York words. So schlep.
Oh,
If you're not familiar with that, that's basically when you struggle to go from point A to point B, and likely point A is 1 block away from point B. It's just like, it's like this New York thing where it's just like, it's a schlep. It's this is where we need Steve Levy. He'd translate these a lot better than me, but. Okay, just want to, we do pause the show and define those things.
And I think it's what happens in that schlep that makes New York hard. It's like, you know, you see something terrible, but then also something beautiful, I think, every day in New York that you're not prepared for, because you're in the elements, like you're in the environment, you can't escape it. You're with hundreds of people at every given moment, you're in the weather, you know, the subway's hot, the winters are, you know, icy rain, and you can't avoid it. So it's like, it just even challenges you. then you have the additional layer of the financial constraints. So I moved from, I was living in a dorm at FIT, but I mean, I remember my roommates and I like pooling our limited coins to like go share a deli sandwich, and that was like our excursion of the week.
Sure. We were living in a closet in that place.
And we had, everyone already had a side hustle. You know, it wasn't like you go to, Penn State and your parents are paying for everything and you're, just going to school and that's your job. Like almost everyone at FIT was working. So I was working at Victoria's Secret on the side. I was babysitting to make ends meet, putting myself through college. So I think just the added hustle of like, it's financially challenging here. And then I think the third final piece of why New York spit me out, at least at the beginning, was more around the, I was surrounded by people who were outstanding talent. And it was very humbling to me to say, I'm actually terrible at sewing. I love to draw, but I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it as a fashion designer. I need to like reset. And so I ended up transferring to University of Minnesota. So back to where I was. I spent the whole first year at FIT.
Get back there, more comfortable. Let's get back, reset. Yep.
Like I'm gonna come back, New York, but you won this time. You won this time
around. Yeah. Well, even Rocky wins in the second one, right? Oh no, actually, yeah, no, he doesn't.
He does.
Rocky's confused here. That's terrible precedent. But so you're back in Minnesota, reset, and what do you study the second time?
So I studied retail merchandising. So I realized like more practical to go for the business side of fashion. And I minored in business management at Carlson School at the University of Minnesota. Had a great experience. Ended up becoming a personal shopper at a no longer in existence department store called Marshall Field's, which was kind of like a legacy high-end retailer. And so I put myself through college on straight commission, selling like designer clothes to suburban women. And also, it was I had colleagues who were these 40, 50-year-old women who were the breadwinners of their family, like making straight commission selling clothes. So it was a really cool, just like life lesson. Learned a lot from that experience, and then I actually got hired out of college to be an assistant buyer at Marshall Field. So kind of normal to segue from the store side to the corporate side. And it was my dream job. I felt like I'd gotten everything I needed in life. I was going to be a buyer. I was going to get to travel to New York, but be in the comfort of living in Minnesota. Quickly, what happened was the Sunday scaries, that feeling of like you've got the knot in your stomach because you don't want to go to work on Monday.
Never. I love all my jobs. No, I mean, no. I absolutely know that. I absolutely know that. Yeah, I was an accountant when I first came out of college, and I was like you. Although the company said, you know what, you're really not good at this, and you should leave the building and not come back ever again, and probably consider it a career change. So yeah, it was a time where I knew I wasn't good at it. So yeah. I completely empathize.
And that's what happened, right? So. I was coming in on the weekends just to like spend 3 more hours with the Excel spreadsheet because I wasn't as fast as my coworkers. It didn't come naturally to me. I was not good at math, and I'm like, oh God, I had this all wrong again. I thought that I would be so good at this.
You're going to be looking at stuff and saying, I want that, and other people, you handle the Excel spreadsheets. Yeah.
I was like, oh, you got to work your way up to that. And there's like a lot of minutia and reporting and things. So my boss at the time, my first boss, who is still a mentor and a friend of mine, she said, it's awesome, which is so critical. She said, Joy, I feel like you're spending all this time on extracurriculars, like volunteering for the charity event and hosting happy hours for new hires. Like you almost are putting so much more energy into your extracurriculars. I wish you'd put that into your main job. And
wake up call.
Harsh, but hear you. And I started thinking about, I'm not a numbers stress person. Like math stresses me out. It doesn't come naturally to me. But like people stress all day long. I can handle it. I can compartmentalize. And so I asked to make a move into the HR team. And that luckily happened. And I went into like what I call the Susie onboarding position, where I was like the new hire orientation leader, basically, for everybody who comes to.
I come in, new day, I'm scared as hell, and you're like, boom, right in the face. Yeah, yeah.
Feel like you made the best decision of your career, tell you all about the company, make you feel like you have a bridge from college to life. Yeah, all those things.
And by the way, I'm going to pause you there for 1 second because I noticed in New York, whenever we do interviews, there has to be a fire engine, police. There's got to be something in the background every time we do it. It's been another thing about being in New York. There's constantly something going on that's not good. So just wanted to point that out. So now you're in the HR team, and this is still at Marshall Fields. This is not Macy's yet.
Marshall Fields, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Literally 3 days in, we get I think it was like the head of PR from our parent company, which now is Macy's. Macy's had acquired Marshall Fields. The head of PR from New York was coming to Minneapolis out of nowhere and was calling an all-hands meeting last minute. And basically he said, so we're merging the Minneapolis office with the New York office, and basically you're going to help everybody find jobs in the next 3 months, and then we're closing down Minneapolis.
Got it. Yeah, when you're merging by the way, just a footnote for everyone out there, if you're merging your small town in the Midwest or South or whatever and New York, not good for the people there, unless they want to move to New York, of course. But it's never like, yeah, we're going to close down the New York office and keep our, office over here. So fascinating.
Right.
Okay.
Going back to like the talent and where they are, yeah.
Sure.
So I had an interesting crossroads of, I know I don't want to be in buying, so I don't think I should like pursue moving to New York to be a buyer because it's not really where my heart is and what I'm going to be good at.
And your mentor said you should probably not be in it. So some candid advice there. Yeah.
Exactly. So I thought, all right, but I also have 3 days of experience in HR. So what are my chances that I'm going to be able to find something even in Minneapolis in HR? So I ended up interviewing for a recruiting job with Macy's headquarters that would move me to New York. And they said, we think you could be okay at this, but we think you'd be even better in learning and development. So kind of stick on this onboarding track, but do it at the corporate level. So 2 things happened. First of all, I got probably the best 3 months of HR training in helping navigate transitioning, I think it was over 100 people, to either retirement, to updating their resumes, and people who haven't changed jobs in 25 years, to like, how do you gracefully exit and give.
Now, were these the local folks in Minneapolis that you were helping, or this was just nationwide where they were?
Entire Minneapolis office. So.
All right. So yeah, you learned a lot of lessons about how to manage folks that you were just working with out in other places. Not terribly easy at all from an EQ perspective.
Absolutely. So I actually look back at that as, even though it was kind of tumultuous at the time, it actually really prepared me, I think, for my future.
Sure.
So I somehow got lucky and got a promotion through this process, which I didn't deserve. And I moved to New York and was the manager of onboarding for Macy's East. And in that role, I had the classic, like, never had managed people before, and I was managing 3 individuals, one of which wasn't performing, the other 2 who thought they should be my boss because they were quite senior and quite many years older than me. So managed through that, learned a lot, lived with 6 French guys in a apartment in Midtown, moved from owning a 2-bedroom condo in Minneapolis to renting a room from 6 French guys.
And by the way, when Joy says room, she means like this closet that was.
Oh yeah, pre-furnished IKEA, yeah, and like I think it was $1,500 a month in rent.
Actually, I would love that right now.
Yeah, this was back in the day, but talk about grit again, and like but I was ready for it this time. This time I like was ready to be back in New York. I was ready to like climb the ladder, do what I needed to do, even if it meant living with 6 French guys, and then I nannied for a South American family every Friday night.
And I haven't double-clicked on the 6 French guys. We're just going to go right past that.
It was a moment in time.
That's an episode in its own. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so I did the onboarding thing. Really great experience. This was Macy's now, so I was working in Herald Square above, you know, the iconic.
And you're onboarding everyone, so not just corporate. You're doing retail onboarding, or just corporate. Okay,
yep.
Got it.
So not the store side, the corporate side. So marketing, finance, buying, etc. And I think I learned a lot in that role about managing up. Our corporate headquarters were in Cincinnati, actually. So we were still this regional division. And believe it or not, about a year into it, we found out we were merging again. And this time we were going to be dissolving all the regional offices, having New York only, and then the corporate offices in Cincinnati.
Oh, wow.
So our learning and development team went from about 15 down to 3 in New York. And I was lucky enough to get one of those positions.
Got it. And how did you? So what you talked about managing up, in what ways, and what did you learn? So
I learned that first and foremost, like, your career is your career. It's nobody else's responsibility, and that your manager is wearing 2 hats at all times: supporter and evaluator. And I learned quickly what mattered to my boss and what she was really evaluating me on. And so I made a point in my one-on-ones with her to focus on the things that I knew she cared about. And I realized that kind of quickly made me just rise in a way of, she knew what I was working on. I knew how to communicate it. I knew when and how to go to her for support. But I was always, like, positioning myself. And I think some people look at that as being political or having an agenda. And I was like, no, I'm just managing my career, and I need to own that.
That's great advice. I mean, I don't think people do that really well. Like, if you think of yourself as a brand within a company or in a career, I think that's great advice. I mean, I think it's actually super important. It's not political at all, but I can see where people are like, you're playing the political game, you're trying to get on our good side. But at the end of the day, you're building your own brand, and that's the way you do it. I think that's super smart.
Well, and to that point, you know, it was also about, hang on, Anthony, I'm getting power. I'm getting power. I don't want to lose you.
All right. Oh, yeah. You know.
Powering up. The other piece was knowing that my boss had a boss, and that person sat in Cincinnati and had her own goals and objectives and had to report on certain things, and figuring out, like, how do I make my boss look better to her?
Sure.
Because we rise and fall together, right? So I took opportunities to celebrate my manager to her boss, but also to build a relationship with her, and that ended up serving me well, because my boss's boss didn't remain in the restructure, but my boss's boss did, and she built the team, and she was the reason why I was one of the 3 people who moved.
Oh, wow. Yeah, very important. So now you're part of this new team. What happens there, and then, you know, sort of, I don't want to yada 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 over your career, but, you know, you're now at Kargo. But talk a little bit about that.
I'll speed through the next decade. Okay. So
yada, yada.
Those formative years, you know, are so critical. So yeah, so I became the manager of the executive development program at Macy's, which at the time it was a 12-week training program for buyers. So I couldn't buy, but I could train. And I was able to basically take what the Central Division, the East Division, and the West Coast Division had done, and take what worked for each of them and build a brand new Macy's centralized best-in-class training program. And I ended up putting like over 300 new hires through that program, iterating it along the way. And I remember feeling like it's never going to get better than this. I'm in my zone of strength. I am fulfilled. I'm happy. And I paid attention to what those things were that were making me feel that way. And one was autonomy. I was trusted to build it and execute it. And I made sure, again, to communicate up and make sure the right people knew what was going on, and I got support when I needed it. But I felt like it was mine, which I really loved the ownership of. And
so powerful, right? Like if you subscribe to Dan Pink's methodology, autonomy is one of the big pieces.
Show the video, Anthony. I show the video to everybody. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So
nice.
so true. So I felt autonomy. I got to create. I got to build something from, take what's working, ideate, innovate. Every time I ran a training, a 12-week session, then it was like what worked, what didn't, iterate, and move on to the next. And I think that mentality has helped me a lot now in the tech industry.
Sure.
Nothing's perfect, nothing's static, nothing's done. It's always about improving.
And now, how do you feel? Because I've been, I think, on a lifelong journey to educate HR folks that we've in the profession itself. I think there's just, and I've been known to sort of write articles on this and be the bastard child of HR, but I feel like there's just this lack of innovation that exists in HR, and it continues to exist. And at first it was frustrating. Now I'm trying to teach, but the fact that you run a performance management program for how many decades that we all know didn't work, had negative impact, all that, but yet we still ran it. So going back to your point, like the idea of iteration in HR, talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a point where in HR we run a program and we run it to death, and it fails, but we continue to run it. Nobody wants to do it. I mean, look at performance management. Only now are we talking about completely removing something that has no benefit to companies, frankly. So talk a little bit about some of that stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So many thoughts on this, Anthony, so many thoughts. Okay.
Episode number 8.
First and foremost, I think it kind of starts with the people who are in HR and the expectations of an HR professional 10 years ago versus what they're going to be and what it's evolving into. So, after Macy's, I ended up working at a division of News Corp. So big company, lots of HR people, and what you find, I think, is that there's kind of like a behind-the-scenes administrative element of HR, and then there's the seat at the table, strategic partner, counselor, therapist part. And I think first and foremost, it's very rare to have somebody who's good at both sides.
Yeah.
So I think in and of itself, I think that some big companies, they just don't demand. They don't demand that HR innovates, and oftentimes you are pushing innovation and your company is too slow to accept that innovation.
Interesting.
And that's what I've struggled with, and that's why I ended up going to let's call it a scale up, because Kargo isn't really a startup anymore. Is I was like, it's so clear to me what needs changed. It's so clear to me what we can do to make the culture better, yet there was resistance. And it's like, why? Why is there resistance? Because it's easier, because it's more comfortable to remain status quo. It's like you can try to change the direction of a ship, but it's going to take a lot of manpower. So I think a part of it is.
I love your perspective on that. I've always felt like it's been a people in HR issue, and while that probably is somewhat of the case, you're saying it's also the organization issue. I always felt like you can change it from the inside, but you're right. I mean, there are organizations that they're not being asked to innovate, and so HR is not innovating in there. So that fascinating. I never thought of it that way.
Well, and to that point too, I do think that there needs to be more education and almost PR around HR earlier. People don't come out of college I want to be a head of people ops. It's just not on people's radar.
Right.
So you think I want to be in finance, or I want to be in sales, and
why do you think that? Why do you think that's the case?
Because I don't think that people understand. Well, let me back up. At the end of the day, I would argue I oversee the largest revenue stream of my company, right? I oversee the people. We don't generate technically we don't generate revenue in HR, but if I'm responsible for all the humans, they are responsible for generating the revenue. So for me, it's felt like we're going through this evolution of HR, and there needs to be more education of, in tech companies, in small companies, HR is getting a seat at the table earlier, because the more proactive you can be about your people strategy, the better result you'll have to the bottom line, just period, the end. So yes, it's a little bit of there are some old school people in HR who are paper pushers behind the scenes, and guess what? They're not gonna be successful, I think, in 10 years in what is expected of HR now. There's the education of the next generation of HR leaders, and that you can be an extrovert and into fashion and a little bit of like a dirty mouth and still be okay in HR. Because you're a human, and it's about being a human.
Are you speaking about yourself a little bit there? Because no dirty mouth so far, and we're a little disappointed to be honest with you.
You learn how to be pretty buttoned up in this job.
I'll rile you up on this show here. Someone in PR got her and said, "Don't say the F word on the New York HR show." So I'll say the F word. All right. So there we go. We got it off. All right. So now you're at Kargo, and I know we're about a half an hour in. So so now you've taken all these experiences, large company, retail, learning and development, onboarding, all this sort of stuff, and now you head up this thing called People Operations, which again, sounds purposeful in terms of its semantics. So I'd love to hear about that. You're not an HR person or the head of HR at Kargo, and then tell us, what are you doing at Kargo? Like, so you're driving, you have this place, this entrepreneurial place, you're likely trying to drive some innovation. What I like to say is you're probably changing the wheels on the bus as it's moving. And so tell us what's happening there.
So much to say. Okay, so I spent quite a few years at News America Marketing, which is a division of News Corp, just like taking every opportunity. So I got all of my HR experience there. And I got to a point where I said, okay, the next move is I want to like own it. I want to be the head of people. I want to create, and I want to be a part of something from a much earlier stage so I can be more influential in building the culture. So I knew that was coming, but I didn't know quite when. And I was 4 months pregnant with my daughter, Hadley, who is a native New Yorker, born at Sinai. You're welcome, Hadley. So I was 4 months pregnant, and I got a LinkedIn message from Ryan McConville, who's the president of Kargo. And he said, you know what, I just saw your background, think you are interesting, looking to hire a head of people to join our executive team. I'd love to meet you for coffee. Cool. And I'm like, okay, never heard of Kargo, but, and this is a little bit of recruiting strategy, very different when the president of the company reaches out directly versus, an agency.
Than a recruiter or, yeah, absolutely. And for those folks that don't know, what does Kargo do? What is their business?
So Kargo is in the ad tech space, and we support premium publishers. So if you think about reading the NewYorkTimes.com, but on your phone, you're on the mobile web. And so we actually serve ads on the mobile web through the premium publisher sites. And our mission is really to support those premium publishers as they continue to distribute really high quality content. But you got to keep the lights on, and a part of that is advertising allows that. But we create turnkey, white glove, beautiful ad experiences on the mobile web.
It sounds like you read that, by the way. I have to be honest with you. I'm going to call you out on that. But all right, so who's a premium publisher? Like, who is it? New York Times?
Like New York Times. Like not free blogs, for example, but content that oftentimes is segueing from like physical distribution, like a magazine or a newspaper, now to digital. So kind of helping those businesses make that change and monetize this type of platform.
Now, are there companies that are in your business that maybe are more familiar to audiences? Like, Kargo obviously probably premier in terms of what they're doing, world class, but are there, like, who's your main competitor for both business and talent?
Well, it's a good question. The reality is that like Facebook and Google have like 95 probably +% of the market share here. Yeah. But the way we kind of see it is, Facebook is social, Google is search, and we're premium content, the mobile web, and editorial. So we actually do a lot of thought leadership around the research and the analytics behind the way people view ads, the way people interact with ads. And like I asked my mom, and she's like, "Oh God, you're the annoying pop-up ad." Right? It's like
you said it before I did.
It's a bad route. So but the reality is that there's all this stuff around fake news. Like we try to take a much more premium approach to it, to be true and to be authentic, to be safe. And so you actually do kind of end up standing for something in an industry that has a lot of fraud and lack of trust. But interestingly enough, we did research that said, when you're in a read environment, so when you're actually like reading content versus when you're in a feed, like scroll environment, you are much more engaged with advertising. And so it's an important sales tactic too with our clients, the brands who
run. Let me understand that. So if I'm reading a long form article on NewYorkTimes.com, I'm more engaged in that advertising that happens to be around that article versus a scroll, which is interesting to me because I would imagine that would be, like I'm deep in the article content and then that side content is just a distraction. But you're saying that's not the case.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah,
so, and I mean, I'm like, my marketing team will probably like, Joel, you're butchering this. I'm doing my best to explain it, but going back to like our beginning of our conversation, I had to learn this, right? At least enough to, know a little bit about what I'm talking about and know how to recruit this type of talent. So from a recruiting perspective and a competition perspective, I think Facebook and Google have set the bar for tech. And so, what I think was a joke initially, like nap pods and ping pong and free lunch, now is like kind of the expectation that
right.
At least
table stakes. Yep. Well, I was going to ask, like, so you're competing with those folks, and I've competed with them for data science talent at Razorfish, technology talent, and it's hard. Like they come with high salaries, they come with some equity, they come with some bonuses. I mean, and then they come with the brand. Like when you're competing for talent at that level, it's super difficult. And so, are you guys doing something different in terms of attracting folks? How are you competing against those folks, particularly in New York? And I would imagine you have other offices in other tech locations.
I think that the first piece is like being realistic that we can't always compete, or we can't compete on every aspect. So knowing like what's valuable and different about Kargo and making sure that that message is clear to the outside world. So we do a lot of branding. We focus a lot on our Glassdoor. We always been really proud of our Glassdoor score, and it dipped by a whole point in this last year. And we triaged and got some employees to proactively work positive about the company, share their point of view and their perspective, and we're back up to a 4 out of 5 stars, which is really hard.
Really, those people that put no, I'm kidding. They do not do that.
So I think branding is a huge part of it. We're on the Muse. The Muse is a really cool platform now that know about it, like the co-branded articles. Millennials are looking for more of an inside look into a company, and really focusing on the places where our talent goes, meetup groups. But let me back up. The most important thing I think to recruiting was when I came to Kargo, we did not have recruiting in-house, and I don't even want to disclose the amount of money that we were spending on agencies.
Oh, I know. I've spent it. I've saved it. It's external recruiters, 30% on, and especially in competitive places like New York, you're 25% on fees. It's crazy how much that gets up to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
So I think one of the first things I did was hired an in-house recruiter, and this guy, talk about grit. He's like a lifelong recruiter, came from agency background. He's a hustler, but he knows the value of really like staying on someone and keeping a pipe and keeping people warm, not even when they've accepted the offer, but like before they walk in the door. Like we do, you bring the person in for happy hour for lunch between accepting the offer and they walk in the door, and just making them feel.
I love that idea. So they get. Let's go back, because oftentimes when we think of innovation, we think of these grand plans. Let's get a chat bot, and they're going to do this, and we're going to get all this data science. But some of the best ideas are the most simplistic ideas, and I love that. So when you make an offer to somebody, and by the time they start, there's some sort of, I guess it sounds like you have regularly scheduled happy hours or events with the company. You invite them to that.
Yes. Yep. And another example is we do like a corporate retreat every year. Our CEO is committed to it, even as we're almost 300 people. And last year we had a few people starting like a week after the retreat. We're like, have them come to the retreat. So we're going to pay for this employee to come and be a part of this like annual celebration, because they're going to get integrated so quickly because they'll have this time to like socialize and get to know people on a personal level. So
that's really cool.
It's not rocket science. It's like being human, and making people feel like a part of it. And that's the other piece is we know there's certain realities. Like apparently engineers are more inclined to work for a company where their product is externally facing. So if they're working in ad tech or in a product that's just internal, it's maybe not as glamorous. So
Sure.
we know that. But what makes it special to be at Kargo? And we get them in our building as quickly as possible. You can see the reclaimed wood behind me.
I have white plasterboard here, so I'm jealous already.
We have a cool environment. And
Where
people
are you guys located in
we're
New
in
York?
Union Square. We're above the Strand bookstore, so iconic New York City landmark, the Strand.
Very cool. Go out for lunch. There's a bunch of stuff happening over there. Very cool space.
And that's kind of important too. Is more and more companies are moving to like remote experiences, and we're very much an in-office culture, which is unique for tech. But
Sure.
I mean, people come here early and stay late because they want to, because the environment's nice. They've got snacks. Their best friends are sitting around them. And
Cool.
I think the definition of engagement is doing great work with great people every day. And so we try to show our candidates that by just interacting with the people.
Interesting. So what would you say, and we'll go, because we're about at the hour mark, what would you say is the hardest part about being an HR leader in New York City? That's one of the things we try to do is differentiate being HR in Silicon Valley, being HR in Minnesota, and being HR in Texas, wherever it is. New York is a special place, and when you're dealing with New Yorkers, and that could be someone that moved to New York or born and raised here, it's definitely a very different place to run HR. What would you say if you were to, not to put you on the spot, but if there were a couple of things you would say differently about being an HR leader in New York for someone that's not living in New York?
Okay. I think first is the reality of just what's happening with the industries in New York. So I think what used to be mostly, finance and maybe advertising, we're now a tech hub, but we're not San Francisco. So I do think like finding talent in New York in tech is additionally challenging because a lot of the best tech resources aren't necessarily here. Second piece is just the cost of doing business in New York, the cost of real estate, the cost of living in order to provide the right compensation to our employees is an additional challenge. And I think that it almost comes to this like bleeding heart mentality of, it's hard, I think, for me sometimes to draw the line of, it's not my I didn't tell people they have to live in New York. They choose to live here. Yeah. And so, kind of keeping that perspective of, your life is going to be a little bit different here. And if you're on board for that and you're signed up for that, like, there's a world of opportunities here. And I think it's almost like the debilitation of choice.
Yes.
In New York, it's like, what restaurant are we going to? And it's like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed. I can't even decide.
Something. Right.
A little bit in HR in New York. It's like, there's the best of the best platforms to buy. I mean, I probably get a cold email from a new HR tech company daily.
What was the one today? What'd you get today? Let's call them out. Let's not in the bad way.
Everwise. It's like a.
Everwise. Okay.
I don't actually know how to describe it. There's like so many different tools for performance management, for engagement, for culture. I'm going to an amazing workshop this week from Imperative, which is all about purpose in your self-organization. Imperative, yep, Arthur Wood.
We got Everwise, Imperative, 2 potential sponsors for our show eventually. So, no.
Yeah, and I think just like narrowing, like shifting through the noise of, there's so many different directions that you can take your company, and there's so many different perks and platforms and ways to support your people. And I find that especially in New York because everything's on the table. The sky's the limit and everything's an option. So kind of like staying grounded and realistic about what's going to matter the most.
Cool. And what would you, we got 2 more questions. We're going to go into your pizza by the slice location in a minute, but if you were to describe being an HR person in New York in one word, what would you, what should someone have? Like, what kind of characteristic? Smart, grit, I'm not going to put the answer in your mouth, but what would you describe the best characteristic for an HR person in New York?
It's a tie between hustle and multifaceted.
Hustle and okay, cool.
Not
cool.
just
Yeah.
you work here. You know, it's like you're not like on a throne setting the tone for your kingdom. You are like in the weeds doing the work, and you can't be a in New York. You got to have the grit. But then I also think, like we were talking about before, you have to be as comfortable, you know, administering California law as you do standing up in front of the board and presenting your strategy for 2018. Yeah,
very rare to find both of those. I call it the plumbing and electric of HR, and then the strategy side of it. Because in the plumbing and electric, if something goes off, it like ruins the entire scenario. But you don't realize it's there until something goes wrong. So, so cool. So you're in Union Square in New York. For those that don't know New York, Union Square, really cool place. You know, a lot of VCs there, a lot of startups in that space. It's really sort of an unofficial tech hub in New York. It also, Union Square, fascinating people watching. If you're ever in New York, sit on a bench. You can spend the entire day there. It's really cool. And then they have different shops and pop-up things there all the time. Really, and from a transportation perspective, every train, from my understanding, goes through Union Square, which is also a very key factor. But we want to know pizza by the slice. So in New York, the best thing I think we offer is not the high-end restaurants, not the food or the sightseeing. I think it's pizza, and being able to get a super cheap, really good slice of pizza is something that New York should be very proud of. So you're in Union Square. You just got out of a meeting with the CEO who took you from noon to 2. You got to grab something to eat real quick because your next meeting at 2:30. What's your favorite pizza by the slice location?
So first and foremost, my husband's from Jersey, and he told me I have no business answering this question because I'm not.
Well, to be fair, I lived in Jersey for a little while, so yeah.
In Jersey, I'm like, we're not talking about that.
Yeah, so, no, it's definitely not a Jersey location, no doubt.
My favorite is Sacco. It's actually not in Union Square. It's 54th and 9th. And
what's it called? Sacco?
S-A-C-C-O. And it's a hole in the wall, but it is amazing and cheap and totally a classic New York.
I love it. It's New York is great. You could get really like good slices of pizza and a drink for like $7. It's like the great. In some cases, $5. So Sacco, it's on 59th and 1st.
54th and 9th Avenue.
54th and 9th. Sacco, 54th and 9th. If you guys are watching, obviously, highly recommend. If you're ever in New York, to hit that. Joy, thank you so much. We are at the end of this awesome. You've been great. Thank you for agreeing to be on our new show here. Hopefully when we look back and we have thousands and millions of viewers, you can say you were on the show. And we'll have you on again. And we'd love to hear more about what's going on at Kargo, and love to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun, and I'm just so thankful that you're doing this and disrupting this space. It's needed. Yeah, if you know anybody, by the way, anybody knows an HR leader that they would like to profile and have us chat with, it's got to be someone in New York. That's why we're New York HR. We'll see you next time, our next episode, where we got someone really exciting in the artificial intelligence space. So look out for our Twitter profile, and we'll see you soon. Take care, Joy. Thanks. Thank you. Take care.